Hello everyone. Welcome to Anthropology Analytica. I am Dr. Arjun Bopanna, Anthropology faculty at Insights IAS. In today's video, we are going to discuss a concept which is called as rural cosmopolitanism. So this particular topic is part of village studies. Rural cosmopolitanism itself can be asked as a 10 marker, or when we are talking about village studies, when we are talking about the features of village studies or rural development or some other concepts in the Indian civilizational studies, we can use this concept of rural cosmopolitanism. So in that context, let's try to understand and see what is this rural cosmopolitanism. Now let's just try to recap some of the village studies that were done in India and what was its outcome. Okay, so village studies in a very crude manner were taken up by the Britishers, okay, in order to ensure their administration. For administrative purpose, the Britishers undertook village studies, but they were not very they were not related with the theoretical studies that were being conducted in America, or rather they did not do it very professionally. Their main objective was to exploit the rural community. Now, when the village studies started in America, right, it had a huge influence of village studies in India. Many anthropologists from America came to India and started to study peasants. Peasantry studies were undertaken in India. Village studies were undertaken in India. One such anthropologist who came to India was Oscar Lewis. So students of Robert Redfield, right? So that his background you should be aware of. So village studies in America and the students of Robert Redfield, they all came to India. They started undertaking peasant studies, village studies in India. So the Britishers, when they did their crude studies about Indian villages, they said that Indian villages are little republics. Meaning they were all isolated and they were self-sufficient, isolated, self-sufficient and inward looking. But in reality, when Oscar Lewis and others did their study, they found that Indian villages were not isolated. They were part of a larger network. So when we say what is this cosmopolitanism, literally what cosmopolitanism means, that being part of a larger group. So rural cosmopolitanism means that Indian villages were part of a larger group. They were not isolated. They were not inward looking. They were not self-sufficient. Indian villages, even in the traditional sense, were dependent on each other. So now what is this rural cosmopolitanism? It is the idea that Indian villages were part of the single community. That means they are not isolated. That means they were not inward looking. They were all related with each other. So if you see Indian villages, you can draw this diagram also in your answer. Okay, so if you see in Indian villages, you draw it like this. So Indian villages were not isolated. They were all networked with each other. So something like this needs to be drawn. So they were all networked with each other. Now, how did this network how was this network established? This network was established from economic relationship with each other. So that means there were trade and commerce between different villages. Whatever, not only the villages, but also with the urban and outsiders. Okay, so economic relationship, exchange of goods and services. Some of the caste provided their services across the villages. For example, the Brahmins of one village provided ritualistic services across the region, across different villages. Similarly, festivals. When there were festivals in a particular village, members of other village also came and visited these villages. Okay, so economic ties brought the different villages together. Similarly, social ties, for example, kinship relationship, marital relationship. See, you might have understood that in many villages, especially in the north, there is village exogamy as a rule. So when there is a village exogamy, they're bound to marry somebody from outside the village. So this established a marital relationship between one village and the other. So village exogamy plus caste endogamy. Caste endogamy. So they were related with each other. So different members of different castes from different, members from the same caste in different villages were linked with each other by marriage and by kinship because of village exogamy, because of caste endogamy, right? So this kind of a network created this rural cosmopolitanism even in the traditional sense. So this study was done by Oscar Lewis, or this term was coined by Oscar Lewis when he undertook his study in Indian village of Ranikera, and when he compared the Indian village with the Mexican village Tepoztlan in Mexico. Okay, so the rural cosmopolitanism is the idea that Indian villages is part of a single community. It was given by Oscar Lewis by conducting a study or comparative study between the Indian villages and Mexican villages. So he says Mexican villages are isolated, they're inward looking, okay, and unlike Mexican villages, the Indian villages are networked, so they form or constitute rural cosmopolitanism. Okay, then they are linked in the traditional sense by various institutional mechanisms like economic ties, social ties of kinship and marriage. Some anthropologists have done even contemporary studies to understand that rural cosmopolitanism is not eroding, rather it is exaggerated or it is increasing today. So today, rural cosmopolitanism is increasing as a result of globalization, where villages are getting networked with the outside world. Similarly, migration or cross-migration is linking members of different villages to form rural cosmopolitanism. Then even agrarian or rural problems or unrest and political empowerment are linking members of different villages together. So you might have seen that when there is an agrarian crisis, or when there is a protest, agrarian protest, unrest, members from different villages come together and they unite with each other and fight against the government, against the administration. This too is leading to a kind of a network. So political network is also assisting in rural cosmopolitanism. Further, you should be able to appreciate that rural cosmopolitanism is part of this great tradition and little tradition as part of Indian civilization, where we see that little tradition and great tradition are all connected with each other. There is constant interaction with each other, diffusion of culture between each other. So in this same context, rural cosmopolitanism also is important for us to appreciate. Okay, so therefore, this rural cosmopolitanism help us to understand or provide a better picture of real Indian village. So this is about rural cosmopolitanism. I hope it was useful. In the next week, we will discuss on Thursday another important conceptual topic. I hope it was useful. Thank you all.